Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Patina's first webinar of 2021, focused on skills for courageous conversation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, presented by Roshini Rakjumar. We're so excited to have you all on today. Here to introduce our guests for today is Patina founder and CEO, Mike Harris. Mike, welcome.
Well, thanks, Dave, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're really pleased to welcome Patina clients and members of our Patina Nation community to today's webinar. We always love it when we have a topic that everybody's interested in, like this one today. You know, the issues of racial and economic equality have really risen to the forefront, especially recently, and it's a conversation that's happening in boardrooms and organizations across the country. And we are very fortunate to have Roshini present to us today. She's a crisis and C-suite strategic communications coach, and she's going to help us all with a framework that's going to help ensure the conversations that we have about diversity and inclusion with both internal and external stakeholders are courageous and thoughtful. And it's a great bonus that the principles of what we're going to hear today really apply across any situation where you have a difficult conversation you need to have. Roshini hosts Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio and the Real Leaders podcast. She's a licensed attorney and a former TV reporter who was called upon by the media across the U.S. for insights and commentary about crisis management, leadership, political strategy, and PR. We're very pleased that Roshini is a valuable member of the Patina Nation, and she does a great job of coaching some of our best clients. And so with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Roshini.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you to everyone who is on today and those who will watch this in the recorded version. The very fact that you care and want to be part of this conversation and learn and go a little more in depth and get some foundational material to help you have more courageous conversations is something I applaud you for doing and spending your time on. And at the end of the day, I always say diversity, equity, and inclusion topics are really topics for all of us. They aren't just some niche. They aren't a fad. They are topics that absolutely will affect your bottom line. And the companies, the brands, the individuals that take these topics seriously will have more profits, will have more employee engagement and satisfaction on the job, and a host of other things that only you know you're trying to go for with your particular organizations. So I want to first start by teaching you a communication formula that I have taught to all of my clients for now nearly 15 years of having my company. It's called the IAP Formula, and you see it on your screen, and it is really a roadmap. It's a communication formula to help you more efficiently prepare for any communication moment. So these can be as simple as an email, a short phone call, a PowerPoint, any kind of communication moment that you do. And there are so many that all of you are doing every week. So you can start getting used to this formula by just putting into play, not for your big game days, but your daily conversations and your daily emails, different kinds of things that you're doing internally for your external audiences. So I promise you, if you use this formula, you will have more efficient preparation. You will have bigger results if you stay true to it. And I know there are some people on today who are clients I've worked with or I'm still working with, as well as others in the Patina Nation who know this formula. And I know you have gotten results with it. So I want to teach it to everybody today as really a foundation and a baseline. So let's start with intent, the I of the IAP formula. Each letter is co-equal in the IAP formula, but the intent really drives the whole process. And it's about you. That's very important to think about. If you are the communicator, the intent line is about you. If you're co-presenting with a colleague, it's about the two of you. What do I or the two of us or our group that's presenting today, what do we want to accomplish? What's our goal for this particular communication endeavor? whatever that is, big or small, no matter who your audience is, the intent line is about you. Then when you talk about audience analysis, the A of the IAP formula, I split that up into a before, during, and after. We're going to get into a little more detail on that in a moment, but I want to first teach you this formula overall. So when we talk about the before audience analysis, it's everything you can do before that game day, I'll call it. So let's say you have a presentation next week and you have a sense of who these people are, whether it's an internal or external audience. Gather all the data that you can ahead of time, whether it's talking with people who already know your audience, Google your audience, go on LinkedIn, whatever it is. And in conversations that are connected with DEI settings, this same thing applies. Are they an internal audience? Are they an external audience? What do you already know about the person or the people with whom you have to communicate? So the before audience analysis is really a lot of that data gathering, all of the data points that could matter or that you should know about to then choreograph your communication moment is so important. And if you think about meetings that you have coming up in any kind of way, any aspect, DEI related or not, and really everything has DEI running through it. But if you think about that phone call you just had yesterday, were you intentional? Did you do thorough audience analysis on that person before you had that call? Now let's get into the during audience analysis. This is really what separates the good from the great, or even the great from the wow, is how much are you able to perform and analyze at the same time. So maybe you start the conversation or you start what's going on. You have to also take in how your audience is reacting to you. Are they on board? Are you seeing signs of they just don't get it? This really comes into play, I mean, all the time, but it comes into play especially so in DEI settings, because if you are tone deaf or not observant with how your audience is taking you in, then you maybe have lost the moment and won't accomplish your intent right there. So for the during audience analysis, I always advise people to plan for the pivot. What do I mean by that? You are really lucky if you go into a meeting, a phone call, whatever it is, a media interview, and everything goes according to plan A. When does that happen for you? If it happens more than 50% of the time, call me because I need your insight. Chances are there's going to be some sort of a change, right? Some sort of a little extra curveball that gets thrown in, or maybe something just happened that morning on the stock market that gets thrown in. So the during audience analysis is being able to pivot to a plan B, C, D, or even Z if you have to, but being ready for it is a big part of the game. And this will come into play later in our time together when we get into a specific audience question about really stressful conversations like terminations or others in that bracket. So the during audience analysis is very, very big. The after audience analysis. This is sort of twofold. It's debriefing with your team, debriefing with your client afterward, debriefing with whomever, debriefing with yourself. And is there a follow-up piece that was needed? Did someone say something that made you think, oh, I need to get them some more information? So Dave, it sounds like, and we are taking questions throughout the session today. As they come up, let Dave know in the Q&A function. What do we have, Dave?
So we have a question coming from Tom. Tom states, assessing audience is easy when doing it live or in person, but could you address some insights in doing it remotely or virtually?
Great question, Tom. Yes. I mean, first of all, hopefully you're on screen. I mean, if you're going to do video, I really recommend people are on screen so you can pick up on cues. Or if, let's say, one person is presenting and everyone else is sitting silent, if the presenter says, feel free to turn off your screen just during my presentation, that's one thing. But really be observant of what you're seeing and build in some questions along the way to also gain some sort of affirmation in the moment if they're tracking with you. Now, this virtual screens aren't perfect meetings, right? Same with phone. With phone meetings, you only have vocal behavior to judge and assess. But I also call on you to really go with your intuition. If even just in someone's vocal behavior, you are hearing some sort of hesitation, or they're not understanding, or they're being sarcastic, or something you didn't expect, take a moment to stop and ask. And this is especially important with anything related to DEI. What you'll learn, if you don't already know, is that across cultures, different verbal and nonverbal cues are taken in different ways. And if you don't know what those are, and you are dealing with someone who is completely different from you for a host of reasons, it's just more important that you stop and ask questions. So if nothing else, in everything DEI, if you're ever confused, it is important to ask questions. You will not look unintelligent. In fact, you will seem empathetic, and you will be very on point. And you can absolutely then turn it into a more winning moment for yourself. So the after audience analysis is important. Is there a gratitude piece you need to do? Is there another piece of information they asked for, as well as debriefing with yourself, with your team, or others, so that you can learn from the particular situation moving forward into other ones. Let's talk about powerful performance. The powerful performance is always about your audience. One or many, that audience is the group or the person you are choreographing your performance, your communication moment for. This is why audience analysis was so important. You got all the data points you needed, hopefully, that you could find, and you choreograph according to what this audience needs, how they need to feel you, see you, receive you, perceive you. All of those things are very key in this powerful performance zone, and choreographing into a way that really delivers your intent. So remember, the intent line is about you, but in order to accomplish your intent, you have to choreograph this communication moment in a way that your audience can understand it and want to be influenced by you. So you have to create that need, that desire for them to either agree with you, buy from you, go along on a project, whatever that point of influence is, but it must be about them. We've all seen situations where people perform and they've made the performance about themselves. I'll give you a little example about how the Patina team got ready for all of you today. We, and I am part of that team, we made sure we asked if you had questions ahead of time. So while you were in the safety of your own space, you could just think and brainstorm, what are my questions? And we got dozens of questions, which was so terrific. Some of them we'll be able to get into today. Others, I promise you can drop me a line and I will respond. But they prepared by being very diligent about how they described this session today. They knew who some of their clients are. They knew who some of their, or all of their Patina Nation members are. And they were anticipating what you might want and how we structure it. I shared an agenda for this day, which you see ahead of you, and Dan gave me the thumbs up on it. And I moved forward with then my preparation so that we could make today as impactful for you as possible. All right, let's get into delivery tools. So these are just some buzz. This agenda is really laid out quite simply. Feel free to take notes about all these areas. Certainly we could spend a whole hour or more on each one of these bold categories, but we are giving you some things to think about, hopefully bring into your world so you are more intelligent and thoughtful as you look at all these different kinds of ways the DEI lenses are playing out and will continue to play out from here on out in our world. So when it comes to delivery tools, you have some things at your disposal: perceptions, body language, and vocal behavior. And to help us, understand some of the perceptions and how we apply the IAP formula to that, I want to go to Chris. Chris is part of the Patina Nation, and she had a terrific question, and I'm sorry, he had a particular question for us today. Chris, can you share your question so that they're in your words?
I think my question was how to be an ally without overstepping. And I guess a little background on my question is I'm part of the LGBT community. And I know I've had some people interact with me to try and show that they're allies, but it kind of puts a burden, or it feels like it puts a burden on me, or it catches me off guard. And, this past year with racial injustice really kind of showing up multiple times throughout the year, I want to show my support and show that I'm an ally, but I also don't want to put people on the spot and make them uncomfortable. But I feel like, we've had some inflection days in particular where I'm meeting with clients, and I feel like there's a big elephant in the room, and I want to make sure that it doesn't get in the way, and that, we all kind of feel supported with each other.
Well, I love your question, Chris. Thank you for being brave and bold and asking it, because I know a lot of people have that question out there, and everyone wants to do the right thing. At least that's what I've found. So one of the things I'd say, and maybe we'll ask you for a little more on this, Chris, is first off, when it comes to the IAP formula and this specific question from Chris, is what is your intent? So when either you're trying to be an ally, want to be an ally, or you need an ally, first of all, figure out which category we might be in there. What is the intent? It's really important to really understand why you're asking a question and what's your intent for then the outcome of it or the answer. Another thing that I would say is DEI is not some separate thing over here. It is part of the fabric, or really should be, of every organization. So if we can take each person as a person and get to know that person. So Chris, let's go a little deeper on this. Do you feel sometimes you are asked to speak for the entire community? Is that what sometimes it feels like?
I think so. Or, like if I specifically remember, there was the attack on the nightclub in Orlando. This was years ago. And I went into work, and like numerous people, I would go into meetings, and numerous people would kind of like say, like, they were lending support and saying like, how are you doing? Is everything okay? But, it was a day that hit me hard personally, because it was a terrorist act against my diversity group, right? And so it wasn't easy for me to articulate in that moment. And I appreciated the support, but it was still kind of, it put a spotlight on me when I was already struggling.
Right. And your question and these comments, and thanks for the follow-up, really present a host of thoughts from me right now, because we still need to take Chris as who Chris is. And my sense is those people in those meetings were really just trying to be nice. I mean, did you feel any bad intent, or did you feel they really were just trying to be supportive in some way?
I totally felt they were being supportive.
Okay. Yeah. So that's great. 1, 2, do you feel like you have the language to use? So, we're going to get into body language, but even actual just words and language to use to be able to give a short answer. I really appreciate your support at this time. Just give me the day to reflect. I mean, I just came up with that on the spot here, but are you in a position where you feel like you could do something like that, and it at least affirms for them that they supported you, but then they don't have the expectation that you're going to give them this whole diatribe of things that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm able to handle when those situations come at me. But I think my my question was more as I want to be an ally for other, communities that need support. How do I do that without having someone feel caught off guard or put on the spot?
And put on the spot. Right. Great. Lots of your question is actually so simple, but actually very dynamic and very intricate. Really, I recommend these kinds of conversations in one-on-one situations. And maybe it's even a heads up email, or just you stop them, when it's just you and that person, and say, I just want you to know, I want to be an ally. If you ever want to talk, or if you want to educate me on something in particular, I will listen with open ears. Mm-hmm. So it goes back, Chris, to each person, and each group is really, every group is still a bunch of people, right? So I'm a South Asian, born in another country, came to the US at just under 2, became a citizen eventually. There are a lot of different layers to even who I am. And I think of myself as an American. And you might meet my mother, who came to this country when she was in her 20s, different experience. She's an American, but you can't even look at the two of us and think we're the same and speak for all Sri Lankan Americans, right? So one of the biggest lessons that I try to teach my clients is we still have to take each person for who they are. We cannot think that just because someone is Asian or Black or Native or LGBTQ, that they are now all of a sudden one word or 2 words. And if nothing else today, if people can remember that, just get to know the person. Get to know the person. And if you feel like, hey, this is someone I could become friends with that maybe I didn't know much about before, then go down that road. But it really is about taking each person where you find them, helping them take you where you are, and showcase that you want to have these conversations. That's where we are in America. Unfortunately, we're pretty far behind in 2021, but we're still at the place where we're gaining awareness and education. And if you and others on this session today can be those conduits to just say, hey, I'm here with open ears, you will get a lot of credibility, both from internal and external stakeholders. Thank you so much, Chris, for this question and for being brave, because you are brave with me like this openly and let me dig in a little more. And I wish you just only good things this year.
All right. Thank you, Roshini.
Body language. So we get into perception. So Chris really helped us look at there are perceptions, right? And adding to that, I'll get into, I'll just say quickly, stereotypes. One of the things I find is a lot of negative happens when we stereotype a whole block of people and think all of this kind of person is this way. That's never going to get us anywhere as a country or as each one of your organizations. So I really recommend getting to know people. Now, I do have some clients who are executives who have taken it upon themselves to be the executive sponsor of some of these kinds of sessions within their own organizations. And I think even if you, the executive, feel like you don't have all the answers, but you want to be part of the journey of learning, and you become that sponsor of that kind of learning in your organization, that in itself will show members of different groups and all of your employees that you are on the right track and you care and you're really trying to have more understanding. Let's talk about body language really quickly. It is one of these things that in virtual settings, like even today, how I'm sitting, making sure posture is good, those kinds of things, body language says a lot, and different cultures have different kinds of body language and what they mean. That could be actually a really fun whether you have internal people lead it and help us get to know your culture kind of sitting, or you do something a little more formal and you really drill down what different cultures and different people, sometimes it's generational, sometimes it's ethnic, different cultures have different body language. I think some things are universally thought to mean one thing or another, but we can't assume that there aren't things that are specific to specific groups of people. So once again, we get back to, we have to listen, we have to ask the questions. Never, never a bad idea to ask the questions. Vocal behavior is so important. In fact, in my book, Communicate That, which you are all getting, the vocal behavior chapter is the longest chapter in the entire book. It's not super long, but it's the longest in the book. And it is because your vocal behavior is sending messages, delivering messages all the time, as well as subtextual messages. You want to make sure intended messages match the subtextual messages. And when you have verbal tics or maybe a real nasally voice or too high pitched of a voice, these kinds of things can actually send subtextual messages that you don't want. And it is not to say if, someone from a certain country has a super high voice, it's not to say there's anything wrong with them. It's all of us doing that self-assessment, how our own vocal behavior or verbal tics may play in to how we deliver messages, because the how is really as important, in some cases more important than the what. You can understand that DEI is so important. You can understand you want to affirm your colleagues, but if you don't know how to communicate that with them, it really won't go anywhere. Okay, let's get into workplace culture. And for that, I will ask for the assistance of Jody Hahn. Thank you, Jody, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And you have a question about engaging employees when they believe, you said diversity and inclusion is just another fad. And I'm just going to start by saying I will always refer to it as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll get into why that E is very important. But Jody, take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. Background on my question is really a compilation of conversations I've had with other executives, supervisors, colleagues, peers, and I've been trying to wrap my head around the challenges that companies are having today with executing successfully on DEI. And so I really just kind of came up with a question as I've been trying to link some of the challenges that I've been listening to and trying to have conversations around. And so also a little bit of experience myself with a challenge in this area. I'm on a nonprofit board, and earlier last year after George Floyd, we came together and to talk about, our organization and what we're doing for our members and what we could do better. And to your point, I firmly believe everyone has the right intention. Their hearts are in the right place. They want to do the right thing. Execution isn't always done in a manner that is successful, so to speak. So in that case, I do get concerned that employees feel like this is just another fad, because the conversations, as to Chris's point, sometimes there's an elephant in the room. And so you're afraid to have some of those conversations because they're heavy conversations, they're difficult conversations. So you avoid those conversations, you go to these trainings, and then you're kind of left with, okay, now what? And so I get concerned about this becoming just another fad. And that's kind of the gist of where my question comes from.
That's a really great question. It really involves a lot for us to unpack today. And here's what I'm going to start with. So part of the reason why I will always say DEI is when people think of it, and I know different companies have different labels, and I'm not at all criticizing that at all, but when we just think of it as diversity alone, there are connotation and subtextual messages around that word. When we think of it as inclusion alone, it's incomplete, right? And when we put D and I together without the E, without the equity, this is where I think it leads to some people thinking it's a fad, because, this is about hiring more minorities or having more women on boards or whatever it is, or this is about making sure that everyone gets to go to the company party or this and that word inclusion. But the equity piece is really about the business case. So this is about, is everyone getting paid fairly? Not just the minorities, not just the women, but everybody in a particular job function is everyone getting paid fairly who holds that title? So if you can really drill in on the equity and help people understand, we're trying to make our organization, or if you're someone in a role to advise others, help those people understand, the more we could show that we're trying to bring all the numbers into alignment. And then that gives people the sense of, okay, things are fair, right? In my work, I can take almost anything as long as I know that whoever's communicating with me is being fair. When I feel like there are two different standards or there's unfairness happening, that's what really gets to me, and it gets me sort of in a defensive posture. And that is how others naturally are. So bottom line, they need to feel like there's equity happening in the organization. And you've heard people talk about inclusion means you have a seat at the table. Well, you can have a seat at the table, but are you actually expected to participate? And that's where we get at equity. Also, if you have a seat at the table and you're not participating, then this is just a check off, oh, you're at the table. Don't feed into that stereotype. So it is both a challenge for the organization and for the individual to show that they are holding their weight and carrying their water, whatever the saying is, and really trying to work on the success of the organization. So I always equate strong DEI practices with more profit and more business. And it just comes down to that. So if you have a business case that doesn't include strong DEI policies, it won't be as successful as one that does. More and more companies, and I applaud the ones that do, they have some sort of chief inclusion officer, chief DEI officer, whatever the title is. But when that person reports into HR, that is also minimizing that role. So a real tactical thing, it's not even strategic anymore, it's tactical, is making sure your executive level reports into the CEO when it comes to DEI work. It is so important. So that is a tactical there. And to get back, Jody, to your amazing question, when the organization, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever it is, when they show that at the very top management levels, when they show that this person is reporting into the CEO or the chair of a board, comes to the DEI topic every time and holds it as equal to other topics, that's when employees see, ooh, this isn't a fad. This is about the business case, and we need more of that. So I applaud the organizations that do that. I have some clients who already had chief inclusion officers long before the summer of 2020, but even some of them have finally moved that role into a reporting function to the CEO and put some of those people on the executive committee. That's one of the boldest things organizations can do right now. And in that, there might not be the same analogy for nonprofits in what I just advised, but I think you can glean that it is really important that leadership takes this seriously. And as I mentioned earlier, an executive actually sponsors it. And it isn't only a manager that now has to get his or her team or their team trained. It is the top levels of the organization that are getting involved in making it that key priority. Jody, before we say goodbye, are there any follow-ups or any other insight you want to share with our audience today?
No, I really appreciate you taking the question. And I think that's really good feedback, and it's important to understand too, the importance of equity in the D&I. So thank you so much, Roshini.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And another piece that sometimes gets overlooked when we're having DEI conversations really is the generational differences. So there's a lot that can be done if we can find ways for generations to teach one another things. And when you do that, you naturally have a mix of race and religion and sexual orientation. So I would also advise that as a strong tactical. Dave, what do you have for me?
Well, we have gotten a lot of questions pouring in, especially after those last two segments, but I will stick with the workplace culture and specifically leadership. So we had a question come in saying, what do you do if there are leaders in your organizations who may not have the best intentions as it relates to DEI or see it as a necessary endeavor? How do you engage them, or do you engage them at all?
Yeah, that is a great question. And boy, that's what we could spend 3 hours on, because there's a lot of sticky in that, right? There are a lot of possible hurt feelings, possible worrying about your own job if you point this out. There's no one size fits all to that question. So what I can try to do is give some best practices in the answer. First of all, do you have a trusted leader at the same level? You know, I talk about with my clients managing up, down, and across. So wherever that particular leader is who you feel might be a bad apple, is there an equal level leader who you have a relationship with, or you at least trust and maybe could take it to them? That is one way to go with it. Now, depending on your human resources department, division, that is another place. I know that that can get sticky. That can be a scary process. But if that's something that is also there, you can certainly ask for your company's policies on DEI. So these are some just general tips, and you might need a combo of some of those tips. But this is one where if this particular questioner could share a little more in the Q&A, maybe I could go a little deeper on the response. Or maybe, Dave, we have another question that can kind of help move that question along also.
I think we can. So that question was focused a little bit more on not seeing DEI implemented, or at least not earnestly. We had one question saying, how do you know equity exists at your company? So how do we know if we're being treated fairly, paid, promoted, et cetera, fairly? So if you want to speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah. So a couple different things. So when I look at equity, there's equity, the money, and then there's equity, like you do something, you're treated one way, someone else does the exact same thing, they're treated another way, and they're not equal, right? They're not treated the same way, whatever that thing is. Maybe it's a good thing and you never get a pat on the back, but other people are always praised for it. Like all of these things are ways that we can look at that term equity. I think, at least in my practice, individuals will always have a feeling or always understand if equity is questionable. It's whether they will take it anywhere. Will they go and try to solve it? Now, when it comes to the salary and the wage, that's something that there should be hard facts out there. That's something where you can go to HR and find out, well, here I'm in this position, it's this category, what's the pay range for this category? Get those hard facts, those details, if you haven't already done that, because then you actually have some data. And I'm a big fan of data. The data really usually doesn't lie. I always say in my past life as an investigative TV reporter, follow the money. You know, when you're questioning something, follow the money and you can get the answers. So follow the money, find out what are the different pay levels, who's getting what. And you might have to have some tough conversations ahead, but at least what I've seen both in my own life over the years working in different organizations and now with my clients as I am helping them in their organizations, you know when a brand is really all about equity or is short skirting it. And that's something that I hope is being taken up at the highest levels of leadership for at least everyone that's on today's call. Dave, any follow-up questions on that, or shall I continue to move along to through a little more workplace culture and into frontline ambassador?
I think we can keep moving on a little bit. And then we have got some more questions that we'll address at the end. All
right. So again, I think in workplace culture, we tried to hit on these three areas. Your individual team, you know, it really starts there. A lot of times people say you don't leave a company because of the money, even you leave because of your boss if you don't like your boss. So if you're a boss out there, it's a really great time to take a look at, do you have a cohesive team? Are you making them feel like they're included, their voice is being heard, like equitable activities and actions are happening? So that is something for every leader on this session today to ask yourself and do your own self-audit. And that's something that I've learned from DEI practitioners that are in this every day, day in and day out, is really do your own self-assessment of where you sit with these topics and make sure you're not the one that's perpetuating bad practices. And if you find that you're seeing or hearing some things about yourself that you don't like, that's okay. The very fact that you're asking and doing that self-audit is good. There's content out there. Of course, Patina can help you with that too, and really try to create your own plan and your timeline for yourself and your team. And if you're in a position where maybe you can reach out to leadership and you are an influencer or you're looking for influencers, these are also some different questions you can ask. So it starts with that self-audit, no matter where you are, and then where can you find allies as you manage up, down, and across. Let's talk about frontline ambassador. Every one of you is an ambassador for your brand. It's absolutely true. And in my case, I'm an ambassador for my company, Roshini Multimedia. Roshini Performance Group is a subdivision of that. And I'm an ambassador for Patina as part of the Patina Nation. I take those roles very seriously, and I know all of you take the role of frontline ambassadors seriously in your organization. We're going to get a little help from Tom Nelson today. He has a question, and maybe he can shed a little more light on it about firings and those really high stakes conversations and situations that involve a lot of emotion. Tom, would you like to share a few more details about your question?
So Roshini, unfortunately, Tom had to duck out a little bit early today for an appointment that he had forgotten about.
All right, I will expound. I can expound on his question unless do you have a related question we could ask? Dave?
Nope, I think we should stick with Tom's. It's a good one.
Okay, we will do that. So his question specifically was, how do we make employee firings with as little emotion as suitable? And he goes on to just give me more background. He's seen some of them really go off course. He's seen the impact on managers and the person being terminated. There's a lot of vulnerability, always emotional. How do we prepare, and what would managers like to talk about that they shouldn't? All right, we're going to go back to the basics of the IAP formula here. Dave, could we show the slide that pulls out audience analysis? Okay, here's where it's really important. These really high stakes, emotionally charged conversations. You have to get the job done, whatever it is, whether it's a termination or something in that really hot seat zone. I say drill down your audience analysis. Make sure you have all your data points ready to go. This is not a let's see how it happens and let's see what sticks kind of situation. You really do need to do your before audience analysis. All the details you can, both positive and if it is a termination for cause, you might have to have some of those causes right there at your fingertips. Have all that with you. Go through it on your own. Read some of it out loud if you're the one actually doing the termination or doing the hot seat conversation. Try to get some of it out and maybe even anticipate. This is when we talked about in the during audience analysis plan for the pivot. So if you do a solid before audience analysis, you're in a better position to at least anticipate where you might have some pivot points. All right. So maybe you give yourself a couple options. Well, if they take this well, this is one way I will go. If this happens, this is the other way I'm going to go. If this happens, I have another game plan. So that planning, that pre-planning is so important in these real hot seat situations. And in the during part, when you're actually communicating with the person, it's really important to analyze their feedback to you. Give a lot of time for questions. If they do get emotional, try not to react with emotion, although you also don't want to be a frozen robot, because this is, I mean, think about it. If it's a termination of any consequence, which, if they have a job and they're getting terminated, obviously that is a very crucial moment and decision in this person's life that the company is imposing upon them. It is okay to show some emotion back. You do not have to be emotionless. You don't want to go off track, what your plan was, but do stop, listen, ask questions, get feedback, and try to get to the end of that conversation. It's also important to really have your intent line down. And what I recommend for intent lines is it is about you, as I've said, but it's a short action verb oriented line. It does not involve a comma, does not involve and. It's a very short, succinct intent line built from a strong action verb. And if you can keep that intent in your head and you've done your audience analysis, that conversation, though it's not one we ever love, should go your way or at least as calmly as possible. All right, Dave, let us talk about the questions that are coming in, because I definitely want to answer those. We'll maybe go back to our original agenda, because that might have some things I can refer to also.
Absolutely. Let me go back for you here. So we have had a bunch of questions come in. We will go through. If you haven't entered a question yet and still would, we have time. So if you still have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we will get through as many as we can. So this question, I think, goes back to the first topic you talked about, and the audience analysis. So the question is, what is a gratitude piece in the after portion of the audience analysis?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you for asking, because that helps me clarify, and I want everyone to understand. It could be as simple as a thank you note. You had a good meeting or whatever, you're pitching a prospective client and you send a thank you note. It could be, that's really the big, is there a gratitude piece? Did someone help you prep for that meeting that went really well? They helped you with your before audience analysis. Maybe it's an internal person or someone who you share that same client, whatever the case may be. Being able to share that gratitude is a really good thing to remember in that after audience analysis.
Okay, our next question has to do with organizational communication, which is what I studied in school. So I'm really excited for your answer to this question. But this question goes back to the example that Chris brought up, and when people were approaching her on a harder day for her. But from the other side, how should that situation be handled? So let me read off this question, and then I'll let you respond. So I completely agree with looking at everyone as an individual, but where the slope has become slippery in our experience is with company communication. We found that offering communication or statements in relation to certain events as a way of showing support to those who may have been impacted can vary. And sometimes it can have opposite effects on others. It becomes a no-win situation and silence wins. But this individual is uncomfortable with silence. And when people may be looking to the organization for a voice or for their support, what are tips for navigating company communication challenges like this?
Right. Well, this is an amazing question, because I have seen since June of 2020 and even up through now, I have seen such a mix of corporate reaction or company organizational reaction to DEI topics. First off, if there is a message that's going out about either an event or a holiday or whatever the case may be, I do hope the company or the part of the company that's creating the message is bringing in from within their organization some of the people that are connected to that event, right? So let's say there is someone who celebrates the festival of Diwali. I hope you are reaching out if you're going to make a statement about it, and you may decide not to, and it's perfectly fine if you don't, depending on your culture there. But you really need to have someone who celebrates that festival to weigh in and maybe give you some talking points or give you at least some messages or bullets before you take it company-wide. So that's one very concrete example I can give. I think that most people find it disingenuous if a company is just doing it because everyone else is doing it, or just doing it for the sake of, oh, we checked off that box. And employees can really feel that and see that. Do I advise that in all cases you do nothing? No, you have to do your own audience analysis of your brand and your company culture. Maybe there's an impact team at your organization that's working on these kinds of topics, and you really give them a lot of the influence here, and you have them report to you what's the best way to do some of these things. But it continues to go back to getting feedback, maybe in annual or semi-annual employee surveys. You ask about a specific memo that went out. We would like your reaction to this. I mean, however you can gain the feedback is going to be very invaluable for future communication.
Great. I appreciate that answer. I also really enjoyed that question. To kind of follow up as far as company policies go and the way that the company presents themselves on these topics, are there any certain company policies that help with DEI that people should make sure that are implemented in their organization?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, everything has to be legal, right? I mean, there are laws that have been covering these things. And I think that sometimes that gets lost in the narrative. Yes, definitely 2020. I mean, look, I'm based in Minneapolis. I am fully aware of what 2020 in Minneapolis and what Minneapolis did to 2020 for the state, the country, and the world. But we can't forget, laws have been in place for decades. And sometimes it's really looking at, are we following the laws that are on the books? And then if we want to add, as an organization, even more protections or policies that really show we are an inclusive organization, have an inclusive culture, that's your decision. And of course, you'll run it by your lawyers and make sure everything is legal. But start with the laws, take actual feedback from employees to see if there are some other things that they would like to see, but also understand that you can't be everything to everybody all the time. I have a client, and this is an actual example, I'm not going to name the client, but I have a client who's in the financial sector, and some employees wanted to wear masks on their face. They have to wear masks at work, but they wanted it to have a specific message. And he said, we can't do that. We can't impose that on everyone, because at the end of the day, we are a financial interfacing with the public. That's going to get us into other legal issues. So the more you're solid on the law and you are applying it fairly and equitably, that's really always the place to start.
Great. Well, we just got another question in that kind of perfectly goes with the flow. So now that we've kind of talked about the policies that can be implemented in these companies, what is your recommendation on measuring the effectiveness of those policies or other strategies that an organization may be put into place regarding DEI?
Right. Well, I've heard of many organizations that will do specific surveys that cover the DEI topic. And then I hear the results go out and then there's no follow-up after that. So first off, doing the surveys is important, but then what are you going to do with those results? You really need to show your teams, your employees, that you are hearing them, you got those results. And I cannot express this enough. For top leadership to be involved in this, whether it is one of the C-suite that is the executive sponsor of a survey or of certain sessions that are happening or of dialogues, town halls, whatever that is, it is so important that the top leadership is showing they're engaged and this isn't something we've brushed off onto HR and, oh, they'll handle it. I mean, really, the sincerity that comes from every level in an organization matters on these topics more than almost any other topic. The IAP formula, as I mentioned, can be used for all communication, and it will help if you really plug it in. Plug it in. Everyone who has a question today, whether we're able to get to it or not, plug in the IAP formula and make yourself fill it out and go through. Do you have an intent with whatever employee communication is going out? Do I have an intent for this employee policy? Who's my audience? And if you have a mixed audience, you need to really deal with that. If you have an audience that's, all 20 somethings, that's another thing to think about as you choreograph. So really use this IAP formula as your friend. It will help you ask the right questions and just be more efficient in anything you're doing, but especially through the DEI lenses.
Excellent. And then what type of tough conversations should board members be having around DEI? I know you mentioned that it's important that the board is regularly checking to make sure that that is a priority amongst all the other priorities of the company. But is there anything specific that board members should keep in mind or be doing when discussing this topic?
Absolutely. Well, if the board is charged with keeping the CEO in check, which they are, it is very important that the board is also coached and trained on these topics. You've maybe heard the letters ESG, which are really important, that boards are living by. And for those who don't, you've heard various different words for what those letters stand for. But the latest that the shaping of it that I've seen is environmental, social, and governance. So these are things that boards are always making sure corporations are following, and the governments and different regulatory bodies are making sure corporations are following. And what I understand, latest reports under a Biden administration, ESG requirements may become even more stringent. And that's a term that I'm taking right out of one of the articles I read about this. So if a board doesn't understand the different metrics that their organization, their company, their CEO, and the rest of the C-suite is using, that is going to be a bad situation for the board. So the board really needs to be in on this. And if coaching is needed for the board, that's one way to go too. My sense of hopefully board members, especially corporate board members, is they keep abreast on a lot of these topics, but it doesn't mean they know everything. So organizations out there, don't forget your boards, because they're the ones who are holding the CEO and other leadership accountable. And then ultimately those conversations trickle down to everyone else in an organization.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question. This one comes in from Lana, and she's asking for you to please provide an example of a short, succinct intent line.
Okay, love it. Love that question. All right, I'm going to give you a couple different examples so you can kind of find the direction I'm going here. So let's say you have, I'm going to put it in the sales context. Okay, so very generalized. Let's say you have a new prospect, you know a little bit about, you've kind of gleaned some things on LinkedIn, Googled them, maybe someone knew the owner at one point. An intent line there, and you're going in, you want to sell this brand because you're like, oh, this could be a great customer. On a first meeting, your intent line is not to close this sale. Your intent line is really to showcase what we can offer, what our brand can offer, or strong action verb in that case was showcase, or to make an impression. That could be an intent line in that situation. Now, if we take it over to the world of DEI, and let me just use myself as a South Asian, grew up in Edina, Minnesota, very, very white community, but foreign born, naturalized citizen, all those things, right? So if I wanted to understand someone who is different from me, my intent line might be, I want to make this person understand me. Let's say that. Let's say there's just something's happening, different things, you're seeing miscommunication happening, and you feel like they don't really understand you. So it's that simple. I want to make this person understand me. Then based on who they are, I do the audience analysis, past practice, maybe past experience with them, and then I choreograph it to a real open, listen forward kind of conversation that ultimately is shaped toward them, but to accomplish the intent of making them understand me better, right? So there's no right or wrong with the intent line, but my strong recommendation is you always remember it's about you, not about your audience. The intent line is about you, and it's built around a strong action verb, and it's succinct. So you're not clouding it with and this, and that, and this. It's a succinct line. Going back to the sales situation, let's say you're in a 7th meeting, you're getting ready for a 7th meeting with that prospect you met back in November. This intent line might be to close the deal, right? So I gave you a few examples. Hopefully you can work with those in your own settings.
Well, Roshini, thank you so much for joining us today. We're already getting comments about how great the presentation was, and people asking to get in touch with you already. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this survey. or of this presentation.
And Dave, if I could just say one last thing, I just really
Mm-hmm.
want to applaud everyone. I cannot tell you enough. I was just very heartened to hear about the hundreds of people who registered for today, whether you're seeing it live or we'll see it later. I mean, that says a lot about you individually. It says a lot about Patina Nation. It says a lot about your brands and that you're really working to get this right. And let me tell you, there is no one way to get there. This isn't going to be something you do for 3 months or 6 months and then everything's fixed. It is that continual dedication. And I definitely want to say it is a beautiful journey. Just the very fact that you're on it, you want to ask questions, you want to further people's understanding of you, and you want to understand others better. That's a beautiful journey. And the more of you who can do that and go out and spread that word, little by little, America will get it together and we will not be in the place that we are today. So I applaud all of you. And I just want to make sure that you know that you are doing a great thing by just being here today.
I will wholeheartedly agree with that. And on behalf of everyone here at Patina, we thank all of you so much for joining us today. A special shout out to Chris and to Jody. Unfortunately, Tom couldn't come, but we really appreciate you guys putting yourselves out there. It's not always the easiest thing to do. So it was, but I think it was a really beneficial addition to today's presentation. Please keep an eye out in your inboxes for the next hour. You should be seeing a post-event survey going out. We would love to get your feedback on today's presentation. And it also gives you a chance to submit any last questions that you have. So I know we still have questions that we're sitting here and that we didn't get through today. I will make sure that we pass those on to Roshini so that she can follow up with everybody who participated today. A replay will be sent out next week. So please keep an eye out for that as well. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Patina event. Roshini, again, thank you so much. This was an incredible presentation. We really appreciate you having you on. All right, have a nice day, everybody.
This has been a presentation of the Patina Nation. To watch more content like this or for more information, please visit us online at www.patinanation.com.